समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Let's discuss the first woman Prime Minister of Japan, Sanae Takaichi, and the widespread implications of this development. She's already famous as a heavy metal drummer, but up close, she's a hardliner with ambitious policy reforms for her country. So one of the most consequential developments in Asia's strategic landscape is Japan's quiet but determined transformation into a more assertive security actor, precisely as Donald Trump has demanded that US allies shoulder greater responsibility. Against this backdrop, Sanae Takaichi's rise as Japan's first woman prime minister in a deeply patriarchal political system indicates a generational shift in leadership as well as in strategic intent. Japan has endured a revolving door of 4 prime ministers in 5 years. Public fatigue with political volatility, stagnant economic growth, and eroding trust in institutions. All this together has created an opening for Takaichi, often called Japan's Margaret Thatcher, to embody both promise and disruption. Yet her path to power was far from smooth. A few weeks ago, I had done an explainer on how she won the race to emerge as the leader of the LDP. Shortly after winning leadership of the LDP, which is the Liberal Democratic Party, the coalition collapsed when Komeito, an LDP partner, withdrew support. Now, Takaichi had to resort to an alliance with the right-leaning reformist Japan Innovation Party, or the JIP. That tactical pivot has secured her the prime ministership and has also set the ideological tone of her upcoming administration. So let's look at the 3 main verticals of what her administration is going to focus on. Let's start with politics, which is marked by nationalism with strategic restraint, at least so far. Takaichi is no political novice. Elected to the Diet, which is the Japanese parliament, in 1993 for the first time, she has served in key cabinet roles, from internal affairs to communications, earning a reputation for decisiveness in a system governed by consensus and factional bargaining. Her political ideology sits firmly on the nationalist right. She is closely linked to Nippon Kaigi, which is Japan's largest conservative lobby, which advocates constitutional revision, traditional family structures, and a stronger military. Takaichi, by the way, also supports amending Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution to legitimize Japan's self-defense forces, or the SDF, and allow for more and better collective self-defense. Now, this shift, if done, could formally end Japan's post-war pacifist posture. And yet, upon assuming office, she has demonstrated strategic restraint. In a symbolic gesture to regional diplomacy, she refrained from visiting the controversial Yasukuni Shrine, long a source of tension with China as well as with South Korea. While her ideological roots remain unmistakable and clear, her early actions suggest a careful balancing of nationalism and pragmatism. Now, the second one, economy. Does she stand for her mentor's Abenomics reinvented, or has she got it completely recycled? At 64 and a protege of Shinzo Abe, the late Shinzo Abe, Takaichi is expected to revive the stalled Japanese economy not through austerity, but with a stimulus package. Takaichi's core economic strategy is a renewed commitment to Abenomics, which is structured around 3 main arrows. The first is called fiscal stimulus, which is expansive public spending to revive growth despite an eye-watering 260% debt-to-GDP ratio, the highest in the developed world. Second, it is about monetary easing, which means continued ultra-low interest rates under the Bank of Japan to maintain liquidity even as global pressure mounts over rising bond yields. And third, it is about structural reform, deregulation, and innovation-led productivity gains. And this was the arrow that remained the least realized component under Shinzo Abe himself. Abenomics, which was first launched in 2012-2013 when Shinzo Abe was the Prime Minister, succeeded in boosting markets but failed to produce long-term restructuring. Without deep reforms like labor market flexibility, digital innovation, and demographic revival, stimulus packages only inflated debt. Now, Takaichi insists Japan must grow out of debt and not cut spending. Now, markets have responded with optimism. The stock market has jumped 4% after her LDP victory a few days ago and hit record levels again upon her parliamentary confirmation as Prime Minister. Yet, the risks remain profound. For instance, inflation has surpassed the Bank of Japan's target. Real wages are declining and industrial competitiveness is eroding. Political scandals involving slush funds and factional corruption have further damaged public trust. Rating agencies are watching closely. Will Takaichi's economic nationalism lead to renewal or a fiscal reckoning? Her first external test will come when she meets President Trump in Tokyo this month. Washington wants Tokyo to halt Russian energy imports, increase defense expenditures, and follow through on a proposed $550 billion worth of investment from Japan into the US, a deal whose contours remain vague. Now, in preparation, she has appointed Toshimitsu Motegi as foreign minister, known for his experienced handling of Trump-era trade negotiations. And now let's come to the third part, which is security and defense, where she would certainly be redefining Japanese pacifism. Japan hosts about 54,000 US troops and remains a core member of the Quad alongside India, Australia, and the United States. Now, since the 1960 US-Japan Security Treaty, Tokyo has relied on Washington's nuclear umbrella and forward deployment strategy for its defense. But two realities have radically changed. First, Donald Trump's transactional approach to alliances, and second, Japan's deteriorating security environment. Japan's security threats are multidirectional and intensifying. First is China, territorial disputes over the Senkaku Islands, and these are central to any contingency in the case of Taiwan, along with Beijing's assertive naval posture and wolf warrior diplomacy. Second, Russia. The unresolved Kuril Islands dispute is compounded by growing Russia-China military cooperation in the Indo-Pacific post the Russia-Ukraine war. Third is about South Korea. The Takeshima Islands territorial dispute and lingering resentment over Japan's wartime history remains a concern. Fourth, North Korea. Advancements in missile technology, including the Hwasong-20 ICBM, which was just recently unveiled, have heightened existential concerns that have led to a disruption in balance of power in the Korean peninsula. And finally, the historical burdens. Japan's neighbors frequently invoke Japan's imperial past, and this complicates reconciliatory diplomacy. Japan's strategic posture is further constrained by what is known as Article 9, which prohibits maintaining warring capabilities. Only after 1992 were the SDF, or the Self-Defense Forces, were allowed to be deployed overseas to participate in UN peacekeeping missions. Otherwise, they couldn't even leave Japan. Defense remained structured around reliance on US forces, especially based in Okinawa. But much of that has changed. And that also started with the late Shinzo Abe. Shinzo Abe was the architect of Japan's security reorientation, reinterpreting, or should I say circumventing Article 9, expanding SDF roles, and institutionalizing the Quad. Now, Takaichi inherits not only his vision, but a global order which is more militarized, uncertain, and less dependent on American leadership. In 2022, Japan unveiled a new national security strategy, followed in 2023 by a defense built-up strategy that enables acquisition of long-range counter-strike capabilities, a dramatic shift from defensive-only doctrine, and all this happened after the Ukraine war. Now, Japan, known as an economic giant wielding its soft power through official development assistance, or the ODA, has now embarked upon what is known as the official security assistance, or the OSA, aimed at developing security capabilities to countries, and the first one, which means the first OSA grant, has gone to building Philippines' military capabilities. And there's more to it now with Takaichi. The new LTP-JIP coalition agreement promises 4 important developments in the above context, which is the security and defense context. Accelerated deployment of long-range missiles and nuclear-powered submarines with vertical launch systems, streamlining SDF command structures and enhancing joint operational capabilities, removal of export restrictions on defense equipment transfer, and expansion of GOCO, which is government-owned contractor-operated defense facilities. But it is frankly the 5th development that is going to get the most attention worldwide, which marks the most ambitious restructuring of Japan's intelligence architecture since the Second World War. Now, one of the most striking innovations is the plan to overhaul Japan's historically weak intelligence system. And the new coalition proposes a few things. For instance, establishing a National Intelligence Agency, or the NIA, and Director of National Intelligence, equivalent to the United States model. It proposes creating a National Intelligence Council by 2026 and launching a Foreign Intelligence Service by 2027. It also proposes setting up a cross-ministerial intelligence officer training institute and drafting a legal framework covering a basic intelligence law, Foreign Agents Registration Act, and Lobbying Disclosure Act by 2025. Now, naturally, the question here to ask is, what are the implications of a sharper, more capable, and more aspirational Japan for India? India-Japan relations have gained momentum amidst uncertainty about the US commitment to Asia and Indo-Pacific. For New Delhi, a more proactive Japan under Takaichi presents both opportunities as well as strategic tests. Japan's willingness to expand defense and technology partnerships seen through projects such as the Unicorn Mass Technology Transfer will likely deepen under her leadership. A more hawkish Japanese posture means India must recalibrate its role within the Quad, especially regarding burden sharing in maritime surveillance, logistics, and military interoperability. Intelligence cooperation may also become a new frontier. How? For years, analysts have debated whether Japan could ever join frameworks such as the Five Eyes Alliance and whether India could align more with such intelligence sharing ecosystems. But with an Article 9 constraint now being circumvented and reforms in intelligence underway, Tokyo could inch closer to these clubs. Now, this raises critical questions for India, particularly around Quad's Maritime Domain Awareness Initiative, which increasingly requires sharing not just commercial shipping data, but also military intelligence. Now, strategically speaking, India stands to gain from a more engaged and empowered Japan in the Indo-Pacific and beyond, forming new trilaterals with Europe, with the UK, and with African partners. And yet, it will require India to move beyond symbolic alignment to substantive strategic coordination. But before any of this unfolds, Sanae Takaichi faces her first major test on October 28 during her meeting with Trump. Negotiating a recalibrated, less lopsided trade deal and defending Japan's core interest in an era of transactional geopolitics will reveal whether she truly embodies Japan's future, confident, resilient, and indispensable in the Indo-Pacific. And I will be back to discuss more on that. Stay tuned.